Good evening and welcome to Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Conroe, Texas. It's a blessing to be coming to you tonight, those who are here in person, as well as those who are joining us virtually. As we tune in for this time and sharing, it's a very important topic and sometimes may make us uncomfortable, but the reality is that it's necessary for us to talk about the safety of our children all over the world, and especially how we might be able to protect them from sex trafficking. So tonight we have the opportunity to learn more and to become advocates for protecting youth in any and every way that we can. To help us tonight to grow in our knowledge and to be able to benefit from her experience, we welcome Brianna Fetkovich, who serves as the Director of Outreach for Street Grace Houston, bringing experience working with the exploited and the vulnerable all over the world. Brianna graduated magna cum laude from Olivet Nazarene University with a degree in corporate communication. She has served sex trafficking survivors in Africa, India, and the United States. Because she experienced firsthand how incredibly difficult the journey back to healing is for sex trafficking survivors, she believes the best way to end the horrific evil of child sex trafficking is through the mission of Street Grace, to stop sex trafficking before it ever starts. Brianna has passionately spoken to thousands of students, administrators, parents, businesses, and faith communities, teaching them to prevent the commercial sexual exploitation of children. With her team, she has mobilized community resources to keep Houston children safe from harm. Please join me tonight in welcoming Brianna.
Thank you all so much. It is a pleasure to be with you all, and I want to thank you for choosing to spend some of your Sunday evening with us. This is an incredibly important topic, as was mentioned previously, and something that we really do have a lot of misconceptions about in our community. And my hope is that you will take this information home with you and that you will walk away with something really practical. And for those of you that are here with us in person and those of us joining from online and virtually, that this won't just be an invitation to learn about an issue, but this will be an invitation to do something about this issue that once we find out about it, it can often seem really overwhelming. But my role here is to really break this down and help you to understand that everybody has a role to play in fighting human trafficking. And that role starts with your own family, that starts with your own community, maybe your place of business, the places that you go every single day. And so I want you to rest assured that you're going to walk away with some really practical tools in your pocket, and you can tell all of your friends and your family what we learned, because that is really how we make a difference here. Is we really spread this information, because there's a lot of false information out there about this topic, human trafficking. It's been in the news a number of times this last year. It's been sensationalized in a lot of different ways, and so I hope that I can just bring some truth to a subject that can often be tricky to navigate. So I have my helpers in the back that are going to guide us through this presentation as we chat. So you can go on to the next slide. I think it's going to talk a little bit about our mission. As was mentioned, I have the privilege of serving as the Director of Outreach for Street Grace. We, as a nonprofit, as a ministry, we've been around for about 12 years, and we have been fighting sex trafficking in an incredibly innovative and holistic way since then. And our home base is Atlanta, Georgia. So if you check out our website, streetgrace.org, or some of our materials, you might notice that there are things for Georgia, Tennessee, California, even some of our work in Florida, and of course right here in Texas. And our mission is a pretty simple one. We want to end the demand for the commercial sexual exploitation of children. Now, at first glance, that sounds like a mouthful, and I abbreviate that as CSEC, but I'm going to break down exactly what that is for you. And our vision is really a similarly simple one, but it doesn't make sense to a lot of people because they're unaware that this isn't already the case, that we don't already live in a world where our children are free from sexual exploitation. And so that's a vision that we want to make reality. And my personal vision in this fight, in this work, is to make sure that every person in the greater Houston area is aware that members of our community are buying and selling and exploiting our children, and that it's something that we don't stand for and something that we can do something about. Next one, please. I like to explain sex trafficking as a river. I am not a native Texan. I'm actually from Colorado, and so a lot of my analogies and descriptions are nature-based because they help me to understand things well. But I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to see the headwaters of a river. Now, near my hometown in southern Colorado, we're close to the Rio Grande River. And you can see the headwaters there, actually, and it's just this tiny, unimposing little trickle of water that's just coming out of the side of a mountain. And if you weren't looking for it, it would be very easy to overlook or to miss. And if you wanted to divert that water, if you wanted to move it or you wanted to pull it up in any way, that wouldn't be very difficult because the headwaters doesn't have a lot of power, it doesn't have a lot of speed, it doesn't have a lot of size. Now we know that the headwaters is only the beginning and that the Rio Grande River grows, and it grows and comes all the way down into Texas and into Mexico. It branches off in different directions. It gains size, it gains speed, it gains force, it gains depth. And it's very, very difficult to contain water that comes into a massive reservoir or in a raging river versus the headwaters. And that's how I understand the idea of human trafficking. Now, at the end of the river, we have organizations in our community and around the United States and around the world that are providing care to those that have already been exploited. Most of the time, these are adult, what we would call survivors of sexual exploitation, and they need really specific care. And children also have safe houses. They're being provided restorative care, and they need specialized care. Somebody that's affected by sex trafficking is unlike any other person. They're not just a victim of crime. They're not just a victim of sexual abuse. They often have very serious, complex issues involving trauma and symptoms of complex PTSD. And so that's very expensive. Texas last year spent $6.5 billion on restorative care services for survivors of human trafficking. And that's only for a handful of organizations because we don't have enough beds or even close for those that are already being exploited and needing care. So those survivors need the gold standard of care, and we need more of those facilities, and we need more support and more funding. But unfortunately, that is at the end of the river. You're dealing with immense amounts of damage and force and speed and complexity. And that doesn't end human trafficking. What makes sense is to take a hike and to walk up to the beginning of the river where it began in the first place, where that little headwaters is, because we can do something about that. That's manageable. And so at Street Grace, that's what we're all about, taking an upriver approach to fighting trafficking, because we realize that in order to do that, we have to focus on children. We're a Christ-centered and a child-focused organization. We always have been from the beginning, because while we recognize there are women that are 19, 20, 30, 40, even 60 years old who are victims of human trafficking, the vast majority of them, the first time that they were victimized was about 13 and 14 years old. And every year we're seeing that number get earlier and earlier. In fact, the average age that a child is exposed to pornography, one of the leading contributing factors to exploitation, is only 8 years old. And so we cannot wait until somebody has already been exploited to get into this fight. We have to go upriver and protect our children from being exploited in the first place. And so that's what we seek to do and equip the community to do with the resources that they already have. And there is no one that is better suited to do this than the church. We have a responsibility in this, and we have resources, human and material, in order to fight this thing. Next one, please. So Street Grace does this in not a one path. We do this in a holistic manner because we understand that there isn't one specific way that somebody ends up into a life of exploitation. Yes, many people have similar stories, but every survivor's story is different. They each have nuances. They each have different paths that led them to a place where they are now. And so we realize that if we only take one approach to fighting this issue, then we're going to have less success. And we need to look at this from a holistic standpoint. And so we call this our 3P principles, our 3 pillars that everything we do organizationally rests upon. So we have prevention and protection. They kind of fit together in a lovely little package. We have policy and we have pursuit. On, please. So prevention is exactly what we are doing today and what I hope will we be able to continue to do as we build a relationship with this church, with those of you watching, and with this community as a whole. We train churches just like this to recognize the truths, the signs of human trafficking, the societal issues that create this issue of trafficking, the language around some of these things, and equip the community to do something about it. And so we have training specifically for parents and caregivers to equip them with how to understand how to have meaningful conversations with their children and the children that are in their care in their community in order to prevent exploitation. But we don't stop at the faith communities. While we do believe that this is kind of God's plan A for this issue, we want to equip the rest of the community. So we train businesses so that they can have a role in this. Even people like, we have a partnership with the Texas Beer Wholesalers Association. These are distributors of alcohol that are going into hotels, restaurants, bars, many places where exploitation is already happening. We're training those drivers to be our eyes and our ears. We work with law enforcement. We work with judges' office, prosecutors. We train schools. One of our favorite things to do is to go into the classroom to equip students and empower them to help them understand that not only can they keep themselves safe online, they can look out for their friends, but they can be a part of this greater movement, and they really are the ones that are going to be the future of fighting this issue. And so that's our prevention P. Our second P is policy. This is incredibly relevant right now. We are in up to our eyeballs in the legislative session right now. We are in the thick of things, and this is critical timing. Most legislators, statistically, never hear from their constituents. And so as an organization, we recognize that prevention is the first step, but our prevention is going to be hindered if we do not have the policy, the laws in our states to support the prevention work that we're doing. For example, we were able to get a House bill passed last legislative session that mandated Texas superintendents to provide training to their staff and their school board about human trafficking. That has given us a beautiful inroad into public schools to speak to students, to staff, to parents. And so policy really, really matters. We do policy that helps shape the way that we fight this from a criminal perspective. Because as you're going to hear as a common thread throughout the way that I'm talking about this, we often only focus on those that are victimized and don't understand that this is a business. We have to focus on all elements of the business, the supply, the demand, which is key to the work we do, and the people in the middle connecting the two. And so you can get involved in policy. Check out our website, send me an email. You're going to get my contact information after this. We have several pieces of legislation this year that your legislator would love to hear from you. They need to know that this is important to the community. It's important to the faith community. And our last P is pursuit. Now, you might be thinking that you came to this training because you or somebody that you're in care of, or you just know that as a community as a whole, this year, we have never spent more time online than this year. right? And some of you are even joining us online, and what a blessing that is. Technology has been a way for us to connect with relatives, with our faith communities, with our work. It has been the way that we've been able to carry on this year. But unfortunately, with that increased access to technology comes increased risk. And many of our children are using technology for distance learning, or they're just playing more video games, or trying to keep up with their friends that maybe they can't see in person. And unfortunately, so are predators. We've seen a huge increase in the amount of predator activity online this year. But predators aren't the only people that can use technology to their advantage. Street Grace and some of our partners built an artificially intelligent chatbot called Gracie. And what Gracie does is she operates sort of like a digital law enforcement officer. Now, she wasn't created to pretend to be a law enforcement officer. She was created initially to gather research, because there's little to no research out there about the solicitation of children online for sexual encounters. And so we created this AI technology. She's very similar to the technology you have in your phone: Siri, Google, Alexa, all of these pieces of technology that are learning artificial intelligence. What happens is she's able to help us post ads on escort websites where you can purchase adults and children for sex. And so what happens is we have roughly 600 unique profiles of children of all different ethnicities and ages. And what happens is when a potential predator is scrolling through one of these escort websites, they happen to click on one of these ads that they like, and it happens to be one of our ads run by the AI. He will start, and I say he, not because I'm being prejudiced. I say he because the data tells us that the average sex buyer, in fact, 99% of sex buyers are males. And so when he clicks on one of these ads, he will start negotiating via text message with the chatbot. Now, he thinks he's negotiating with, say, 15-year-old Ashley who lives in Dallas. And so they're texting back and forth. He's asking how much, what's it going to cost, where are we going to meet up? He's asking for photos. He's sending photos, all in a way that he has no idea that he's talking with a piece of technology and not a real child. And then he's eventually going to get what we call our deterrence message. Now, this is key because, yes, we're gathering data about buyer trends across the United States, which is valuable to law enforcement and to nonprofits fighting this work. But we also want to keep people from coming back for more. The biggest deterrent for an online predator is being found out. They operate in this cloak of anonymity. They hide in the shadows. Nobody ever knows what they're doing, and that's why there's so much power in this. And we see that in Scripture, right? That sin has power when it's in the darkness, and we need to expose it to the light. That's exactly what we're doing. So they're going to get a message that says, hey, you're not actually talking to Jessica from Dallas. What you're doing is actually a felony in all 50 states, punishable by up to $100,000 in fines and 40 years in federal prison. Your name, your phone number, and all of those photos you sent, and this entire conversation has been recorded. And it's accessible to law enforcement, state, federal, and local law enforcement in a permanent file. We suggest that you do not try to solicit sex online again. And so this person will get this message a couple of hours later, though we don't stop there because we know that behind sex buying behavior is a broken human being that didn't get there overnight. And they're not going to get out of that situation overnight either, and certainly not just from one text message from us. And so we connect them with a website, and you can actually visit a version of this website yourself if you or somebody else you know is struggling with porn addiction or sex addiction. We're going to talk about that in a bit. It's called notlove.org. You can find resources in all 50 states where you can connect to a counselor, a group. You can find resources for those struggling with sex and porn addiction. We're able to track how many of these folks are taking that first step to get help. During the pandemic, it's increased 30% of folks that have started to take this first step to get help. Gracie has been a part of over 300,000 text exchanges. She's operating in 15 cities across the United States. She can chat simultaneously with 10,000 sexual predators at the same time. So she's the equivalent of hundreds of officers working around the clock. And most importantly, that's over 300,000 children that were not approached by a real predator. And then the question that's on everyone's lips, well, do you arrest them? Yes, we work with local law enforcement partners, and we make their operations that they're already doing a lot easier by offering this technology to them free of charge. And so it's a really cool way that we're able to pursue sex buyers and connect them to resources for help in order to keep our kids safe when we're all sleeping and on holiday and vacation. So what does the problem look like here at home in Texas? Human trafficking is a here problem. Wherever here is for you, maybe you're tuning into this from the metro area, maybe you live in the suburbs or in a rural area. Human trafficking affects every single state in the United States. This is a global issue, but it's also a hometown issue. It's certainly a Conroe issue. And these numbers come from the University of Texas. They're just a couple of years old, and they represent a modest estimation. Now, these are reports made to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The vast majority of people that are sexually exploited, especially children, are never reported to any kind of agency. And so keep in mind that this is a modest guess, that at minimum, we have 314,000 victims of trafficking in Texas, and almost 80,000 of those are children. If you were to take 80,000 children and put them into big yellow school buses and line them up end to end, which we've got a habit of doing and running them through metro areas in order to make a statement, it would take roughly 2,000 school buses to fill with all of the children that have been reported in Texas. And so this is no small issue, and something that many people think only happens in faraway lands, or it only happens in the shady parts of the metro area where you can see it. But unfortunately, most of this goes unseen. Family members are trafficking and exploiting our children, their own children. Other students are exploiting other students because they've been groomed and coerced themselves. Some kids are never even present with their abuser or their exploiter. It all happens online. They never leave the safety of their bedroom. And so many people have this misconception that these 80,000 kids must be the kids that are kidnapped. Not so. Most kids that are kidnapped are sexually abused or exploited, but you do not have to be kidnapped to be sexually abused or exploited. So I get a lot of questions about human trafficking and some of the language associated with this. And so just to make sure we're all on the same page, I created this handy dandy little chart. Now, human trafficking is the larger umbrella term. This encompasses both global trafficking and local trafficking. This includes men, women, children, people that speak our language, people that speak many different languages, people that have come to our country legally, illegally. It encompasses everyone. And then underneath here in Texas and in the United States, we have two major forms of human trafficking. There are other forms of human trafficking that happen around the world, but thankfully, these are the two major ones that we deal with. And to be honest, we actually have about a 50-50 issue here. We have about as much labor trafficking as we do sex trafficking, but sex trafficking gets most of the attention, unfortunately, but labor trafficking is a horrific crime that is happening to members of our community, and sometimes the lines between the two are often fuzzy. So the difference is a labor trafficking victim is somebody who is a victim of force, fraud, or coercion as it relates to their work. So what does this look like practically? Most of the time, this looks like somebody in our community who is working in some of the following industries: agriculture, landscaping, construction, hospitality, and the massage industry. And so most of these folks, especially those who are doing landscaping, hospitality, as well as sometimes working in restaurants, that kind of thing, they are usually those that have come here to our country, sometimes illegally, sometimes legally. Many times they do not speak the language, but sometimes they do. And what they find is when they get to our country, all of a sudden they have incurred this massive debt that they were told nothing about, a travel tax, as it's called, something that they will never be able to pay off. And so they're essentially in debt to the person that has brought them here or given them a job. Or they're being treated unfairly at work, they're being abused sexually, physically, emotionally. Perhaps they're in unsafe work conditions. Maybe they're not being paid what they were told, or they're not being paid at all. And so oftentimes because of their status as a citizen or not a citizen, or their language barrier, they never tell anybody. because of the fear of what will happen to them. And so that's a lot of the labor trafficking that happens here in Houston. Now, why I said some of the lines get fuzzy is I mentioned massage parlors. Now, if you keep up with the news, you might have seen that we had a horrific incident happen about a month ago in Atlanta, actually, the home base of our ministry. And there was a man that opened fire on several folks that were working at a massage facility there in Atlanta. And we know from the context that we're fairly certain that those members that were killed were folks that were being trafficked. And we have that very same problem here in our community. We have recognized, and the number grows more every day, over 600 illicit massage businesses in Greater Houston. Many of those are in Montgomery County. And they oftentimes are in strip centers, and many of them have very similar look to them. They often have signs in the windows that are either curtains or stickers, logos that will black out the windows. They often have a buzzer-controlled door, a security camera. If you were to take a look, they're often open much later than normal massage establishments. And yes, they do offer foot massage, reflexology, all kinds of massage services, but they also offer sexual services as well. And so they're running a legitimate business with a backdoor brothel. And most of those women who are working in those massage industries, they have been brought here from Asia. And unfortunately, they think they're going to be working in a hotel or a restaurant and send money home, and they're being forced to perform, work, massage or nail services or reflexology, but also sexual services as well. And so that's a horrific evil that is happening in our community, and it is very, very much in the public eye. And we do a lot of work with that as well, and that's something you can check out our Houston Illicit Massage Report on our website as well. And so underneath that we have sex trafficking. Now, the big question on everyone's mind, what is the difference between a sex trafficking victim and a prostitute? Or as some folks would say, a sex worker. Now, we actually reject the term in this industry, of those of us fighting against sex trafficking, we reject the term sex worker. Not because we don't have any respect for women that are in that industry, or because we're judging them or shaming them. We reject that idea because we don't believe that sex is a form of work. We believe that somebody who is being paid in order for their body to be used as exploitive, and things that are exploitive cannot simultaneously be a job. And we know that because of the thousands of survivors that we work with who've told us that many people would have thought they were your run-of-the-mill prostitute, that they were just an adult who chose this line of work. And unfortunately, many sex buyers think that when they're going to get a massage from somebody, that they chose this line of work. Or when they are consuming pornography, that the person on the other end of the screen or the camera, well, they most certainly are an adult that chose the adult entertainment industry. Or if they're out on the street, I mean, yes, they most certainly must be a prostitute, and I don't know what led her to this situation to choose this lifestyle, but she certainly chose it. And unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. She is a victim, and I say she, but it does happen to men as well, and to boys and to girls, is a victim of force, fraud, or coercion. And so that's the difference. That person does not have to be a victim of all 3 of those things, just one. And most of the time it's not force, but most of us are looking for force. We associate this with force. Most of the time it's coercion, which is difficult to prove, difficult to see, and difficult to recognize if you're the person being coerced. Now, to make a note about children, I mentioned earlier, CSEC, the commercial sexual exploitation of children. What is that? Well, by definition, a child cannot be a prostitute in the state of Texas. And there is no such thing as a child prostitute. And the reason is that any commercial sex act that is done with a child that is a minor is by definition child sex trafficking, or the term that we use, the commercial sexual exploitation of children. So let me break that down. It's any sexual activity involving a minor. And I say any sexual activity to help you understand that this is not just a physical sexual encounter with a minor. This could be a photo or a video, something that is entirely digital. It fits into the same category. It's the same crime. And this is something of value that is given or promised. Now, you'll see 4 or 5 icons pop up on the bottom of the screen. And sometimes it is a sex act in exchange for cash. But not most of the time, often that is what something progresses to after that child has been groomed over a long period of time. And then that might lead them as an adult to be in a situation of trafficking. But sometimes they're exchanging a sex act for something to eat or somewhere to stay, a roof over their head. We see this in our children that have run away. Our children in the foster care community are at such a high risk for exploitation. 60% of the kids in our child protective services will be sexually exploited at some point. It's as if they're walking around with a target on their back. And so oftentimes they find themselves in a situation, they think they found somebody out on the street who wants to be kind and care for them, but really they're just there to take advantage of them. And sometimes it's a substance. Sometimes they've been coerced, they've been abused, they've been manipulated into getting hooked on a substance, and so they're selling it for that. But sometimes they're exchanging a sexual photo of themselves for online currency in a video game, or a new pair of Nike shoes, or a designer bag. It's things that you and I may not always think of, and so we have to think out the box when we understand this definition, or we're going to miss some of the vulnerable members of our community. Next, please. This is a number that is pretty staggering. 1 in 4 girls, and get this, not too far behind, 1 in 6 boys will be sexually exploited before they turn 18 years old. That's a number that we are not okay with, but it also shows that this is not just a female issue. And the amount of young boys that are trafficked is growing at a higher rate than ever before in history. And there's a couple of reasons contributing to that. I'll mention that later. So these are some common questions that I get when I'm talking with, caregivers, people in the community. Who are these predators? Culture tells us that they look a certain way. Am I right about that? Who's vulnerable? If we're a child-focused organization, we're talking about students. So surely this is the foster kids, the kids that have, a parent that's maybe incarcerated or abused. And how do those factors play in? And what about the average kids? Are they at risk? How does this happen? And how, if we're parents or caregivers, should we talk with our kids, and at what age? What is appropriate? Many parents have this very valid concern that if I start talking to my kids before they are ready about sex and sexuality, then I'm going to take away their innocence, and I'm going to incite their creativity, and now they're going to start asking questions, they're going to start looking for things. But all the data tells us the actual opposite, that the earlier and more often parents have conversations with their children about sex and sexuality, the less likely they are to engage in any kind of risky sexual behavior, the less likely they are to be sexually abused, and the less likely they are to be sexually exploited or trafficked. And so I'm going to equip you with some practical ways to do that. We have to understand, like I mentioned previously, that this is a business. Now, every business on the face of the earth operates with these 3 principles to some extent. This just happens to be the second largest, fastest growing illegal business on the planet, second only to drug trafficking. And drug trafficking is fighting for its spot as number 1 right now, and human trafficking is very, very quickly going to overtake drug trafficking for a couple of reasons. Remember, I mentioned that we do policy work. Well, in the state of Texas, and unfortunately many states, if you get caught trafficking drugs, there's pretty harsh penalties, especially in this county. But if you get caught trafficking children, there are still penalties, but especially if you're trafficking an adult, they are not near the severity of some other crimes like drug trafficking. And so it's much more appealing when you know that you're not really going to get into that much trouble. Secondly, it's much more lucrative to traffic a child than it is a drug. You might be thinking, why? Drug dealers are some of the wealthiest members of our community. Well, yeah, that's true, but they do live a very high-risk lifestyle, and they recognize that going to jail or prison is sometimes just the cost of doing business. That's a very normal reality for a drug dealer, not so with a trafficker. And they're able to make a lot more money because if I'm a drug dealer and I sell cocaine, I meet up with my buyer, I give him the cocaine, he gives me the money. Great, I made a sale. But in order for me to make more profit, I have to get more product. It's going to cost me something to acquire that product, right? It costs me nothing but my time and my energy to acquire the product of a vulnerable child. And I can sell that child over and over and over. As a pimp once told me, not me, my coworker, A child is a renewable resource. That's how they view them. And not only can you sell the child over and over and over, but you can make more profit because you can sell their photos and you can sell their videos online. And so the opportunities for profit are endless. And so this is a very appealing industry. So you have to understand that it has supply and it has demand and it has somebody to connect the two. If we want to dismantle this thing, we have to attack the business model. And we have to pull apart all three of these, and that's why at Street Grace we focus on all three of these. The exploited persons, which I told you could be anybody, but we focus on children. The demand, which I told you that 99% of sex buyers are men, but let's talk about them specifically. What do they look like? Take a look at these gentlemen on the screen. If you saw them in line in front of you at H-E-B buying bananas, would you pull your child close to you and say, "Don't look at that bad man. He looks like a pedophile"? No. They look like normal members of our community because they are. Culture tells us that pedophiles have a certain aura to them. They must be balding, they have a mustache, they certainly have to drive a white van with no windows and lurk around playgrounds just looking to snatch up kids to take to their basement. That's not reality. This is reality. They're corporate executives. They're CEOs, they're Spanish teachers, they're grandfathers. They're members of the church. They're people that blend in, just like anybody that you would see at the grocery store. And the data does tell us that the average sex buyer, and by the way, 10% of men in Texas are currently buying sex on a regular basis, the average sex buyer is a 55-year-old white married man that makes between $100,000 and $300,000 a year, has a graduate degree, and has children. Probably not what you thought. Now, let's go on to another part of the business model, the trafficker. Now, culture would call these folks a pimp. Those in the industry or in the life, as somebody that's been exploited, that's what it's called, they're in the life. They might call these guys a daddy or any other slang term. We don't call them pimps just because culture has kind of made that a really cool, casual word, and there's nothing cool and casual about somebody that sexually exploits a child for their own selfish profit through manipulation. And so take a look at these people. I see women up there, I see couples, I see a high school student, I see a bishop, I see a mom. All people that we probably didn't think were sex traffickers. Because again, we had this idea in our head that the bad people in our community, we could probably spot them. We would feel a little something weird if we were around them, and that's not the case. Anybody can be a sex buyer, and anybody can be a trafficker. So where do these exploiters go to find children? I'm telling you that the vast majority of the kids in our community are not being kidnapped, chained to a bed, and being forced to work as a sex slave. That the most dangerous place for kids in our community is alone in their bedroom with their smartphone. So this is where these predators are finding them. They go where the students are, and where have they always been in the last 5 to 10 years, but where have they been especially this year? Social media and online games, the first two places. And then we're returning to places like school, church, and clubs. But most of the time, 75% of the time, that person met their exploiter online in some capacity. This idea of stranger danger is completely gone. It is very normal. Children also don't even have the capacity to differentiate between in real life friends and online friends. They kind of think they all fit into the same category, and it's totally normal and fine and safe to share your entire life with somebody online. You can see why that is an open door of opportunity for a predator, because the internet has already done half of the work for them. They've done the beginning process of this grooming process. Now, the grooming process is present in every situation of either child sexual abuse or exploitation. It doesn't always look the same, but the steps, these 5 components, are almost always present. But social media pretty much takes care of number 1, befriend. You can learn so much about a child. You can learn about what makes them vulnerable, what they like, what they don't like, who their friends are, where they go to school, their activities, their interests, their religious affiliations. You can learn all of this without even having a conversation with them. And so most of the time, this looks like a romantic encounter. This person is the nicest, kindest, either friend or girlfriend or boyfriend that the child has ever met. Then they're going to intoxicate them. They're going to offer them whatever is missing that hole in their life, that thing that makes them vulnerable. Maybe they're a child that comes from major affluence. They have every material desire that they could want. But what they really want is just some of their parents' attention. And so that's what makes them vulnerable. And so the predator is going to intoxicate them with overwhelming amounts of attention, affection, and words of affirmation. Or perhaps that child comes from poverty. And they look at all of the other children in their school and they just wish that they could have a pair of shoes that didn't have holes in them. And so that exploiter is going to fill that need and buy them things that they could never dream of owning, and give them that boost of confidence. And then they're going to isolate every time. But they don't do this in a way that looks like kidnapping or abruptly separating the child from people that care about them. This is slow. The trafficker, the exploiter, is going to take as much time as necessary in this grooming process. This can take 2 weeks. This can take 2 years. The predator is going to invest as much time as necessary because they know that the return on their investment is invaluable. And so in the isolation process, they're going to slowly make the child believe that the parent, the grandparent, the caregiver does not have their best interest in mind, that they're really just out to get them and ruin their life, something that if they're a teenager, they already sort of have sitting in the back of their mind anyway, and they kind of go either way depending on the day. And so they're going to say things at just the right time. Your parents are so hard on you. They never give you a break. Man, it seems like your parents don't even trust you. They don't understand you. And so they're going to slowly plant these seeds. They're going to do the same thing with the children's friends. They're going to make up stories that their friends talked about them behind their back, or that they only like them because they're wealthy, or that they say nasty things when they're not around. All kinds of things that aren't true, because if they can get them away from people that would see that this is going on and isolate them, it's much easier to victimize them. And then we get to desensitize. At this point, if they're a very young child, they're going to start, and they're trying to groom a very young child, they're going to just desensitize them by maybe asking to take photos of them, or offer to take them to gymnastics or go swimming, or get them in environments where they're wearing less clothes, they'll start tickle fights, these kind of things. But if they're older children, then they're going to start introducing them to things. Perhaps this is a romantic grooming situation and not a adult-to-child situation, to new places, people, drugs, activities, things that all still feel really new and fun, but also safe, but dangerous. And then you finally get to the exploit. At this point, the child realizes, oh man, I'm in trouble. I am with somebody, I'm in a relationship, or somebody is now hurting me mentally, physically, emotionally, sexually. But who am I gonna tell? I burned all the bridges with my family and my friends. They wouldn't believe me. And the person that's exploiting them is blackmailing them, threatening to share their photos or their text messages or their conversations with their school, their church, their community, their parents. They're threatening to kill their little brother, their little sister, their dog. They're physically hurting them or harming them. And so they've convinced them that if they did tell somebody, that no one would believe them, that the whole school would call them derogatory names because of what they've done. And so essentially these people are free to leave. You've interacted with them every day in our community. You just don't know. You've probably interacted with children that are in this situation. You just didn't know what you were looking for. They're free to leave. They're free to move about. They're not being confined to a room. They're being confined to the jail cell of their mind. But the good news is that we can intervene in the grooming process. If we are able to identify, befriend, and intoxicate before we get to desensitize and exploit, we have a much greater chance in intervening in somebody's life before they're ever victimized. Take a look briefly at some of these apps. These are some of the most common places that predators in our community are reaching kids. You might recognize some of these, you might use some of these. If you are a parent, I would caution you to allow your children to access apps that you don't know anything about. But we know it can be really tricky. It can be difficult because what was cool yesterday isn't cool today, and there'll be something new tomorrow. And so we recommend that you do a ton of research, and we've done some of that for you. On our website, we have on our resources tab an app safety guide that we're constantly updating. You can click on one of these icons and you can understand how it works, why it's dangerous, and what we recommend for you to make an informed decision about what apps your child is using. And I'm telling you that the mass majority of predators will approach on the apps that you as a parent might have yourself, like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok is a major one. And then they're going to try to move to these third-party apps because they have less privacy settings, less people that they pay to police for child sexual abuse material, which is child pornography, and these types of things. And so we recommend doing your homework. Like I mentioned previously, this is not a gender-specific issue. This isn't something that just happens to girls. It's something that happens to boys as well. We see this in increasing numbers in young boys that identify as homosexual or transgender or bisexual or anything that is kind of outside, and they're exploring their sexuality in some way. These boys are big targets because oftentimes they feel ostracized by their community, they don't feel accepted by their friends or their parents, and so think about the grooming process. What makes someone vulnerable to exploitation is that they have a vulnerability, and certainly a young child who is considering these ideas about their own sexual identity is also going to have a target on their back. But then there's another way that's really unique that boys are being exploited. If you notice, it's kind of dark, but he's holding a game console. It's okay, you can go to the next slide. And we know that, I read this recently in the New York Times, 99% of boys ages 11 to 17 years old in the United States are using at least one type of online game. Man, that is a huge percentage of our population, and I'm not here to condemn video games in any way, shape, or form, but many parents have no idea that most of the time when kids are playing these games, things like Roblox that many parents of young children think is just a digital version of Legos, that they're chatting with grown men all over the world, that they have access to their children via a headset or via a messaging app like Discord, a third-party app like Twitch, or they're streaming because all kids want to get famous and be a famous video game player, so they're putting videos of themselves on YouTube, which will spark conversations, and then they'll ask for their social media and they'll chat. And many times, this is just very, very normal behavior, and so this can be really scary when one of the people that your child is gaming with is all of a sudden saying, hey, how would you like to have $100 to spend on the game? Because all of these games have online currency that any player can send currency, which is real money, it's equivalent to someone's credit card, back and forth in the game at any time. And so they can lure in the child by giving them hey, how would you like $100 right now on League of Legends so you can buy this new avatar or weapon or whatever to give yourself an advancement in the game. And this young boy's eyes are lighting up at the prospects of how famous he's going to be because he's got all of this money to spend on the game. And so he spends the money, he's loving his new status, and then the predator comes back and says, hey, you're doing really well, you're such a good player, how would you like some more? All you need to do is send me a photo. And sometimes they request photos of the child themselves, sometimes they ask the child to take pictures of their older siblings while they're changing in the shower, etc., to make videos of themselves. And these kids that have really no idea, they'll do this for the allure of the money, or they're young enough not to know that it's a problem to take a photo of their sibling and send it. And then they end up in an extortion situation where then the child doesn't want to send any more photos, and the person on the other end says, you have 10 seconds to send me more photos, or I'm going to share this with everyone you know, or I'm going to, again, kill your mom, your dog, your brother, etc. And they really do follow through with some of these requests and use some of their sneaky tactics to say, I know where you live, and all of these different things. And so this is really, really easy to prevent. We just talk to our children about the dangers of giving away your personal information and accepting money from anybody on a video game. Now, we're going to get into the really practical of, okay, what do you do? What do you do at home? And I want you to hear me say this. I can't say this enough. If you've tuned me out this entire time, come back to me right here for this. The best way to prevent sexual abuse and exploitation is through ongoing, open and honest conversations with your children. This is not a one-time conversation. This is let's use every day as an opportunity to point out healthy relationships, identity, communication, boundaries, things you're shaping and informing their view of not just the mere act of sex, but this identity in who they are, so that when they end up in a situation where they're being asked to sext, which we know 1 in 4 kids are sexting. It is a very, very common way, and most kids see no problem with this at all. It's something that is rampant in schools in this area. I know this because I work in these schools and talk with counselors, and this is such a big issue. And they're going to be able to come and tell the parent, but only if they've established trust with them. And if you have a child that is very, very young, you are in a great position, because you have the ability to shape this from age-appropriate conversations from the time they're 2 and 3 years old about body parts and boundaries and safe touch all the way up to high school. But if you have a student that's 19 or 20, it's not too late to have this conversation either. And I assure you that if you are not having these conversations with your children, someone else is. And you want to be the one that is informing their views on these really, really important topics. So I mentioned some things about sexting. This is a major bullying issue. It's even led to, beyond bullying and abuse that can happen when children's images are shared like wildfire among friends and around school and social media, because it's most of the time they're dating somebody, the person they're dating asks them to send the photo, and then they break up, because we know all middle school relationships last forever, right? And so it's even led to many suicides because the bullying has gotten so intense. It's a criminal act for an adult to distribute or see any kind of child pornography, so we do recommend that if an adult is sexting with your child, or you find out something about that you do report it. But many children, they do not understand the consequences of this. They just think this is normal, average, everyday teenage behavior. And so we created a cool video on our website. It's also on our YouTube channel. It's about 3 minutes long. It's an animated video called "What's the Big Deal About Sexting?" And it follows the girl who was sexting with her boyfriend and some of the consequences that happened. And it's a really good conversation starter to spark something like this. So I recommend you check it out. So what do you do if your child already sent a sext? And this is good information to keep in your repertoire, because the parent that says, "My kid would never do that," or "My kid would never look at that," or "This isn't going to be a problem for me," is the parent that oftentimes is in ignorance, and that child is the person that needs the most help. You're setting yourself up for failure with those kind of thoughts. And so although I hope your child never ends up in this situation, I hope that you're informing their views of sex and sexuality and they're not sexting, this is really valuable information to have. MissingKids.org, which is run by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, is kind of the authority on this. And they can help you step by step get your child's images removed, because oftentimes they're posted to social media and they are posted to porn sites. Good luck getting them off of a porn site without help. It is very, very difficult. And that's something that we want to emphasize when we're talking to students, that innocent little video that you thought was going to disappear because you sent it on Snapchat could be recorded and uploaded to a porn site. You could be 40 years old and your children would be looking at that on a porn site. And so it's tough, but this website can help you step by step. Contact the police, especially if an adult is involved. And this last one, above all, you have got to decide now that your response will not be shame. It can be incredibly difficult to find out something like this, or to find out that your child has been habitually looking at pornography or any other issue like this. But if your child senses even the slightest amount of shame, maybe it's not the words that you're saying, but maybe it's your body language or the look on your face. If they sense that amount of shame, they're going to retreat and they are not going to tell you about something like this happening again, and that's where the damage is done. Because then if they are not telling anybody, that's when they're so vulnerable. They're in that isolation stage. And so it's great to have these conversations with you if you're co-parenting with someone else, so that you're on the same page about, okay, how would we handle this if we found this out ahead of time? Because you'll be much better equipped than if you're in that emotional state that you found something out. And if your child is telling you that somebody sent them a sext, or that they've sent a sext, congratulations. That means you're doing a great job. The fact that they told you is incredible. So that's something that we really want. And we recommend using everyday experiences. Driving in the car is really good, or like you're doing laundry together, or washing dishes, or preparing for supper, or going for a walk, so that it's not this formal, let's sit down across from each other and talk about sex. Because nobody really likes that feels uncomfortable both to the parent and the child. And so using everyday experiences to just be teaching moments. And we like to play the what if game, or the would you rather game sometimes, and we recommend you mix in some what ifs that aren't serious in nature. You know, what if you were on a desert island and you only had one thing to eat for the rest of your life? What would you pick? But then you're going to ask something like, how do you decide that you're gonna accept their friend request? What's your policy? Do you have one for yourself? And then maybe use that opportunity as a parent to share how you decide. What if somebody sends you a picture that makes you feel uncomfortable? Like, what do you do about that? And do you think that it's the person's fault that send the photo, or why do people send photos? And take an interest. I'm telling you that demonizing social media or video games is not going to work. It's not going anywhere. And it's difficult as a parent because parents did not grow up with these things, but the children in generations now in high school and middle school and elementary, they've never known a world outside of communicating with social media. And so to just shame them on how much time they're spending, help them develop their own boundaries. Most kids don't want to be spending as much time as they are, but they feel addicted to their device and the status that it gives them. But step into their world. Ask them who their friends are. Ask about the video games that they're playing. Take an interest in the things that they're doing online, because that's going to give you a window into the opportunity to have these conversations. Next one, please. Here's some just real practical do's and don'ts. We recommend never, ever, ever for a child to go to sleep with an electronic device in their bedroom. We just think that it is the safest because of personal experience that we've dealt with hundreds of students. This is kind of like after 9 p.m. when predators are all over the place. They're all over the place during the day too, but this is when kids' guard is down. They often don't have a parent looking over their shoulder, and so we recommend that students use an alarm clock that you plug in and not their phone, and that everybody, even the entire family, if the entire family participates in this, it creates a great sense of unity of maybe, hey, everyone puts their phone in a box at 8 p.m. or whatever time you as a family decide is appropriate, or in a charging station overnight, and the laptops and the computers are only used in common spaces. Not because you don't trust your child, but because you are setting boundaries for your child because you love for them. And many parents are hesitant to set these boundaries because they want to respect their child's privacy. That's not your job. Our job as caregivers is to keep our children protected. Their privacy is not primary. It's something that they earn as they grow and gain our trust, but your responsibility is to keep them safe. And so you can communicate that in love, and so we recommend that the entire family works together to create a family safety plan. You ask for the students' input, like, what do you think as a family would be some good policies surrounding technology, downloading apps, using different things, what time we use technology, how much we use technology, etc. Make sure they know their friends, talk to them about it. Make sure their location services are turned off. Most apps will ask for this by default. Make sure that they're not meeting people in person that they met online. We saw this happening a lot during the height of the pandemic because kids are bored out of their mind. They're so sick of their little brother and their family that they're chatting with somebody on Snapchat and they're saying, hey, Mom, I'm just going to go meet my friend at the park and we're going to hang out 6 feet apart, but really they're meeting a stranger at Starbucks that they met on an app. So talking to them about that, moving to a different location, downloading apps without permission or knowing what they do, and using those third-party messaging apps without knowing who they're talking to and having that conversation first. Now, before we're coming to a close here, but I want to talk about one of, honestly, the most crucial aspects of this whole thing. It's something that, as the church, we have struggled to talk about this topic. And unfortunately, because of that, it has become a major stronghold in our communities. The numbers of people that are captive to watching pornography are almost identical in the church and out of the church. And unfortunately, the largest consumer group of pornography is not adults. It's children ages 11 to 17 years old, girls and boys. Many people just think that this is a boy's issue or a man's issue, and it certainly isn't. And so you might be wondering, okay, I understand we're in a church, and so we're going to talk about pornography, but what does this have to do with sex trafficking? It has everything to do with sex trafficking. You cannot have a conversation about preventing sex trafficking without having a conversation about pornography. They're connected, and let me explain why many people don't understand the connection. A couple of things. So when a person, let's use an adult for example, the adult consumes pornography. Many people think, well, that's their choice. Totally morality, spiritually aside. If we're just talking about this from a mere secular perspective, that's their choice of an adult to watch another adult performing sexual acts. Well, I can see why somebody might think that if they didn't realize that a huge percentage of the people that are being filmed or taking their photos are not willing participants. They are victims of force, fraud, and coercion, victims of horrific abuse. There is no regulation in the adult film industry. There is about 50 pages of regulations of what you can do with an animal on a Hollywood set, and 0 regulations about what you can do to a woman on a porn set. And so that lends itself to exploitation. Now, also, there are not, you're thinking, well, what about the porn stars, the sex workers that chose this? Yes, there are some of them, but there are not even close to enough willing participants, adult performers that chose that lifestyle to satiate the demand. And so what happens when there's demand? Somebody has to meet that demand. They have to get more supply. If there's not enough willing participants, that's where trafficking comes in. And so these predators are going to make friends with your children on social media and convince them to send their photos so that they can satiate this demand for pornography, because the largest demand is for child porn. We know that because the search engines, when you go to look for pornography, you can search for what you're looking for, down to the very, very specific, anything you could possibly imagine you can search for on a porn site. The most commonly searched for term is teen porn. So if that is the highest demand, then we have to satiate that demand. And there's certainly not enough children who are wanting their photos on porn sites, and so somebody has to exploit them to get the photos. Same with adults. So when you are watching pornography and you think you're not hurting or harming anybody, you are contributing to this cycle of exploitation and harming somebody that you don't know whether they're there willingly or not, and contributing to this larger industry that is exploiting people that are not willing participants. It's also problematic because we know that the vast majority of sex buyers got to their sex buying by pornography. For example, the article that I mentioned recently about the man that shot those people in the massage parlor in Atlanta, he admitted to having a sex addiction. He didn't want to be controlled by his sex addiction any longer, and so in his mind that had been warped by this issue, he decided that, well, I don't want to be controlled by this sex addiction anymore, so I'm going to get rid of the thing that is controlling me. And unfortunately, those were innocent people. And so we look at that and we go, okay, sure, that was one guy. Well, I told you about our chatbot Gracie that's chatted with over 400,000 predators. And then we work with law enforcement, and we partner up with other organizations in this community who try to do restoration and provide classes for those people that are arrested for soliciting sex and soliciting sex from minors. They all have the same thing in common, and they're watching pornography. And so it's progressive. A lot of people don't understand that porn is just like a drug. And we know this because scientists have studied the brain, and the part of the brain that is highlighted on a map when they put the electrodes on the brain and they're stimulating somebody with a certain thing, they can see what part of the brain is lighting up. The pleasure center of the brain, it lights up when somebody sees pornography in the exact same way it lights up when somebody consumes sugar, goes for a run, smokes tobacco, drinks alcohol, gambles, etc. And we know that porn is, just like any other addiction, is progressive, okay? And that makes sense when we're talking about drugs, right? Because we know that unfortunately people die of drug overdoses. Well, why does that happen? Well, because they started out with a certain drug and maybe they progressed to a harder drug, but they need more and more of the drug in order for the brain to go, ding, 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 I feel pleasure. And so they take in so much that the body can't handle it, and they die from a drug overdose. Well, you don't die from a porn overdose, so what happens? Well, the body still does that same thing. It's looking at the porn and going, I need more. I need more. That's why porn is addictive. But because of some of the other things going on with internet pornography, even just the fact that it's a digital image, which some of the blue lights and things create massive addiction patterns in our brain, you say, I need more. Well, what's the problem with that? There's endless supplies of free pornography anywhere, anytime. You're never going to get to the end of the pornography. And so what does the brain then do? Because it's looking at variety. I need more. And it goes, I'm not satisfied. I'm not getting the high. I need this. So then they start looking at more deviant pornography. This is problematic because 88% of pornography is already violent, and it's violent specifically toward women. Pornography is actually a form of gender-based violence and a form of specifically violence against women of color in many circumstances, disproportionately so. And so they start looking at more violent porn. Well, it's already 500 times more violent than, the HBO of 15 years ago. And so that's not doing it. So then all of a sudden they find themselves looking at pornography of 18-year-olds, and then all of a sudden the brain says, I need more. They're looking at pornography of a 15-year-old, and then that's not doing it, and maybe this is years perhaps. They're looking at pornography of a 10-year-old and then a 6-year-old. And so the person that gets arrested for trying to solicit sex from one of our chatbot ads of somebody that says they're 13 years old, they were not born with a predisposition to be attracted to children sexually. It was created through a progression of an addiction that we as a society think is completely harmless. And we know that it has devastating effects on our children. The child that views pornography at only 8 years old is not developmentally able to understand what they're viewing. And we call that an adverse childhood experience. And that's the same as being sexually abused, having a parent that's incarcerated, a parent with an addiction. These are something that can affect the child for the rest of their life. And so we know that girls and boys ages 11 to 17 are the largest porn consumers. So what happens when a young girl whose parents are not talking to her about sex watches pornography regularly? Well, she learns about sex. What is the message that pornography is teaching her about sex? It's teaching her that not only is it normal for women to be degraded, not only is it normal in a sexual encounter for women to be physically harmed, not only is it normal for them to be humiliated, but they should do so at all times with a willing smile on their face and look beautiful while they're being humiliated, harassed, and degraded. And so the research tells us that girls that watch pornography are significantly more likely to be sexually harassed or assaulted than girls that don't. Now, what about young boys that are watching pornography and they're not learning about sex from their parents, they're learning about it from porn? Well, 18-year-old boys that watch pornography are significantly more likely to buy sex than boys that don't. And we know that the messages that pornography tells us is that to be a man means that you should do whatever you want, whenever you want, in whatever way you want to a woman. And so these are really damaging messages to our community, so much so that we have a piece of legislation out there that we didn't write, but one of our partner organizations did, that would declare, like many states have already done, that porn is a public health hazard because of these issues. So I'm not here to shame or condemn anyone that is watching pornography. I know how difficult it can be and how alluring it can be, especially to a young mind. And so we at Street Grace, our desire is that people have these resources. They can no longer say, I didn't know, but they can do something about it. So we have our websites, notlove.org. If you are an adult who is watching pornography, if you care about not exploiting children, you have to stop, but you probably can't stop alone. And so we recommend that you talk to somebody about this. And if you don't know anybody, go to our website. The resources are there. And if you're a child or a teenager and you still aren't sold and you kind of still think pornography is whatever, check out our website. We made it just for you, purelove.org. You can get all of your questions answered. You can submit anonymous questions. There's a video on there called Your Brain on Porn. Check it out. It's really great. And the good news is that there is hope and healing for those children that have been exposed to pornography. Your brains can heal unlike some addictions like smoking and alcoholism that sometimes are reversible, all the science shows that the pathways in the brain that are actually carved, the neural pathways that are changed by looking at pornography, it's completely reversible once the person stops looking at pornography. So there is so much help. There is so much hope out there. But we have to educate the members of our community about this issue that many people are just simply ignorant about. And so lastly, before I leave you with what you can do, this is the National Human Trafficking Hotline number, and out there on the table, we have several resources that you can pick up. You can also find those on our website, and there's some great little cards provided by Sacred Heart that you can put in your wallet, so you can always have this phone number with you. I put this number in my phone so that I can access it at any time, so that if you are in a situation where you see someone in a circumstance, maybe you're at a gas station and you see a young girl walking up to a semi truck, or you're at a hotel and you see somebody maybe a girl that seems to be dressed inappropriately for the weather, or she's with someone that doesn't really look like her dad, or just these circumstances that you might get a little check in your spirit. It's always better to make a report and to be wrong than not to say anything at all, because you could be the only person that saw them that day. You can make an anonymous report, or you can even send in your text report to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They use it for data, they use it for research, and it's really, really important that if you see something, you say something. So lastly, what do you do with all of this information? First and foremost, don't keep it to yourself. Share what you learned today. Share this information. The more that we're willing to talk about this issue, the more that we bring it into the public eye, the less power it has over our community. And so if we start talking about this is how organizations like, you might be familiar with MADD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They started out with just a group of women who wanted to start talking about this issue, and they've grown to a nationally recognized organization. And so we hope to do the same just by having conversations. There's a lot of fake stuff out there on social media, and so if you do social media, we recommend that you follow us, just because we often have events, we have trainings, we have resources, we have legislative updates if you're interested in that, ways that you can get involved, and most importantly, truth. We know that the internet needs some truth out there, so please follow us on our social media. You can find us at Street Grace on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a TikTok, and it's not Street Grace, it's at Help Locker, if you want to find us on TikTok. Like I mentioned, you can write to your senator. Be a liaison. We need connections. If this training impacted you in any way, we would love to speak to your child's school, your business, maybe you're part of another faith community or a club or an organization. We have a specialized training for nearly every member of the community and the groups and communities they're a part of. And so I would love to talk with you about it. So send us an email, reach out to us, and connect us. This is one of our biggest needs, is we just need places. We need platforms to share this message, because our work is really in the prevention efforts. And lastly, if it's on your heart, donate. We're a nonprofit, and the work that we do in the community is only done because we have people who care about helping us keep children safe. And so if you'd like to donate, you can do that online. We have a Donate Now tab right on our homepage, so we make it really easy for you. This is my information, and since I'm here with you in person, those of you that are here, please take one of my business cards. They're on the table in the lobby as you leave. But if you're joining us online, feel free to take my information, save it, and I'd love to hear from you. I'd like to hear your feedback. If you have questions, and if you'd like to connect us to any opportunity, I would love to chat with you. If you have questions about our websites, again, for adults struggling with porn addiction, notlove.org, purelove.org for our students, and our website is streetgrace.org. Be sure to check out the resources tab. There's tons of great things there for parents. And that is all that I have for you. I know that we've gone a little bit over on time, and so thank you so much for being gracious on that. And I will be in the back foyer after this, so feel free to stop by, get some materials, ask questions, and I'd love to just say hello. So thank you so much.